So how does this thing work? Woohoo! It's on. So welcome everyone to the Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Conference. I'm going to ask all of our esteemed speakers to move to the front of the room, and we have special chairs just for them. So as soon as we get a raid at the front of the room, we'll get started. Whew, got real quiet. Well, we are, of course, excited to be back together again and excited to be back in Avon and glad that we arranged such a perfect day for you all. It's pretty nice out there, and you're going to be in here with us for a while this morning. We'll take a break mid-morning and go out and refresh ourselves. But for the next hour or so, we're going to hear from folks who have the very practical experience of working with federal and state agencies to get their work done on the ground, and then the folks who actually are doing that work, and the agency people who are here to have this conversation and have some back and forth, and we hope to engage you all in the conversation too. So when we start out, my name's Casey Davenhill. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Watershed Assembly, and very happy to be here and welcome you. And I'd like to just really quickly go around the room and ask you all in your outside voices to just tell us who you are and who you're with, what brings you here. We'll start with Mr. Sakata. Early to get a seat in the back. Our first speaker this morning is Nate Pearson, Recovery Officer with the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. And Nate has dedicated his career to public service for the state of Colorado and is here to talk to us about the bipartisan infrastructure law, kind of getting us off the ground, kicking us off. You'll hear more from Nate later on today as well, as he is also part of our plenary session this afternoon. So Nate, I'm going to hand you the mic, and you don't need the clicker. So please take the floor.
So yeah, hi, Nate Pearson, Recovery Officer at the Department of Natural Resources. Great to be here. Excited to hear from the rest of the panelists and from the rest of you. As Recovery Officer at DNR, part of a team that's spread out across state agencies to help manage all of the new recovery and stimulus funding that's flowed from the federal government, state government over the last few years as the nation has gone through the economic recovery after the pandemic. And so I'm located at the Department of Natural Resources. I advise the director of the department as well as the governor essentially on how to utilize all the variety of funding streams to accomplish our conservation goals. Also help manage a number of programs within the department that have been funded recently by stimulus and recovery funding, including some recent watershed funding at the CWCB. But I've spent a lot of time over the last year, I guess 11 months since the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, thinking about one, all of the amazing opportunities for the state, but mostly how we at the state help local governments, nonprofits, watershed groups, water districts seize on this unprecedented availability of funds. And so I can give sort of a brief overview of what's in the bill. I don't know if we want to wait until questions to talk about sort of how we're approaching it as an agency, but there's an incredibly broad swath of water and forest health funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I think encouragingly from federal agencies and the Congress people and senators who passed the bill, a growing recognition of the link between forest health and watershed health, which is amazing, and there's a lot of funding for both issues. And so, across the bill, I would say there's probably upwards of $30 to $40 billion sort of solely for water funding. Much of that falls at the EPA's state revolving funds, which is managed by CDPHE and DOLA and the Colorado Water and Power Authority. DNR does not have a formal role in administration of those funds. But then there's another really exciting bucket of funds at the Bureau of Reclamation, about $8 billion, which was under the Western Water Infrastructure title of the bill. A lot of that is internal funding at the Bureau to fix and repair and maintain assets either owned or transferred by the Bureau to local managers. But there's a significant number of competitive grant programs that fall within the Bureau. Some of those are new grant programs, some of them are existing ones that have been plussed up. The same goes for NRCS, and I think there's folks on this panel that will be talking about PL 566, which was also plussed up in the bill. Sorry. Yeah. But so within the Bureau of Reclamation's sort of $8 billion, there's 3 new really exciting watershed programs. There's a multi-benefit watershed health grant program. There's a watershed management project grant, and then there's an aquatic ecosystem health grant program. And I think all of those present really, really interesting opportunities for Colorado. I've spoken to a number of folks around the state who are either already planning to apply for one of those or evaluating their project's suitability for those grant programs. The state's taken a couple of actions to try to help support those entities that may be going after those funds. One, I've been trying to be out in the field talking to folks at conferences like this, talking to folks about just the opportunities that are out there. 2, we are trying to support through sort of formal technical assistance through the grant process. So the CWCB has funds available to offer technical engineering services, grant writing services for groups that maybe have a project idea but don't have the capacity to get it across the finish line and actually submit that application. The state and this is being managed by the governor's office, but also set aside funds during the last legislative session to help local governments and state agencies secure the matching funds that they need to meet the requirements of federal grants. And so we've been trying to approach this problem of capacity to seize on these funds from a variety of angles. And I think there's a lot of interesting tools that we've created, and I think we're in the early stages of implementing them and are obviously tracking how successful we are and whether it's something that is worth continuing for sort of the lifespan of many of these grants, which I would say are generally between 5 and 10 years. So unprecedented availability of funds, really exciting opportunities for Colorado, but a lot of work to be done to seize on it. And the state's doing everything we can to try to support entities across Colorado in seizing on it. So happy to answer any questions now or towards the end, but otherwise can pass the mic on.
Few minutes. Is this working? Okay. And we do have a few minutes. We have set aside roughly 30 minutes for each section of the program this morning. And I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is how do you address the local capacity and engagement, as well as building the sort of community engagement that will really last long term? These kind of big shots of large dollars are a little scary, and we heard last year that local communities really benefit if they learn some of the data collection skills, that they become more proficient themselves in some of the engineering aspects. How is that being looked at, both in the big picture level, and how's Colorado dealing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in state government for a while now, and I've been through downturns and booms, and it's definitely harder to spend a lot of money well than it is to cut budgets. And so it's an interesting problem. I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it's an interesting problem to try to work through. And as you said, local capacity to seize on we have a system calibrated to a certain level of funding. All of a sudden, it jumps up. How do we adjust to that and really seize on the opportunity? And I think so. The funds that I mentioned at CWCB that are designed to help build and strengthen that local capacity are sort of taking a two-pronged approach. One half of the grant program would be sort of direct cash grants, and in that case, a local group or a nonprofit would actually be able to hire term-limited staff to work on those projects and build in-house capacity. The other half of the grant program will be a centralized contractor at CWCB, whose time we can loan to a group that may not want to bring on a full-time position or a part-time position, and so a group that's evaluating a project may say, we need 50 hours of engineering services, 20 hours of permitting, work, and then 30 hours of grant writing. And that would be something that the program can loan the time of expert centralized contractors. And Anna may have a lot, or will have more to say about this too, because it's a problem too that's being addressed on the state level through the water plan grant program and some staff that were added at CWCB as well. And so I think just creating resources at the state level that can assist local governments in building that capacity themselves. There's also a lot of federal resources out there for the same, whether it's online webinars or programs that you can go through to sort of learn how to navigate the grant process. And even a few federal programs have sort of direct technical services programs in the way that we're offering them as well. So.
Thank you. So I was interested to hear from the folks who are here today. Was it Town of Frederick? We've got some municipal folks here, and I'm sorry, anybody else from local municipalities? Okay. I really love it, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. I mean, what kind of questions might you have? It's a great opportunity. We got Nate right here, and I could ask him questions all morning, but this is your workshop, so please speak up.
I would just throw where we think we want to go with it, but then you get to that point of being able to fund all that fun and exciting new things. So as far as a first step, is it just meeting with you directly or your team and starting to just help map out a plan that we can work forward with a funding strategy? Or, I don't know, it gets overwhelming when you start looking at all the dollars and needs that your community has.
So yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to chat through and to try to help communities strategize on the funding sources that may fit their project or not. I think that is another one of the services that the contractor that CWCB is bringing on will be able to offer, is just navigating the funding streams, understanding, what is available for your project. And I think so many federal grant programs have, a wide variety of types of projects that they fund with different benefits. And I think, one that looks like it may fit, maybe doesn't, but if you think creatively about it, there's a way to fit it into that box. And so, especially with multi-benefit type projects, I think there's a lot of creative ways to fit different funding buckets together or fit it into, a grant program that it may not, appear at first blush that it would fit into. And so, yeah, I'm happy to take those meetings. I know that we're working on bringing that contractor on actively right now, but once we have them on, that's the type of work that they'll be able to assist with as well.
Thanks a lot. Kevin?
Nate, one of the issues is coming up with the match, local match. Are you guys gonna require match, and if so, what %?
So I believe the match is
25%, half of which can be in kind.
yeah. So 25% local match for the state program that will offer this technical services. As Anna just said, half of that can be in kind. And then, so that's matching for the technical assistance program. If and when a community actually applies for the federal grant, most of those will require a match as well, which could be met entirely by the local government. But as I mentioned before, the governor's office has a fund from Senate Bill 215 this past legislative session, where they're managing $80 million that is available exclusively to state agencies and local governments, so not nonprofits for the time being. I don't know if that will change, but that would be used for matching for the actual project or the actual grant at that time. And then there are other creative ways that state grant programs that are using state cash funds could be used to match a federal grant. Many of our state grant programs have a matching requirement. The federal grant programs have a matching requirement, and I think those can be harmonized to work together and minimize the degree to which a local government must put funds up front for a project.
You mentioned that some of these matching funds aren't available yet to nonprofits. Is there a path that's moving forward to make that available? And then also non-government entities, but are also sort of critical infrastructure entities like ditch companies. Are there any plans to sort of be inclusive of them?
So I would say many of the existing CWCB grant programs, other state grant programs at CDPHE or DOLA are available to that sort of broader group of entities. The bill that I mentioned, specifically Senate Bill 215, calls out state agencies and local government. So that's the only matching fund source that I'm aware of that rules nonprofits out. And I'm not privy to whether there's conversations about expanding that in the future, but that is by statute for that specific fund.
Now's your chance. Any other questions in this small group? Okay.
I don't really know if I have a question, but as manager of water or wastewater enterprise funds that are TABOR restricted, we can only receive a certain amount of grants into those funds. But I think the benefit of working for a local municipality is that a lot of this watershed effort ties into source water protection, and so there is an opportunity to engage with local water providers to get some seed money for some other grants and things. And we're also not just focused on source water quality improvements and partnerships in the Clear Creek watershed, but receiving grants and funding for things like lead service lines And so there's other considerations that go into that, where those enterprise funds go.
That just a comment that absolutely right to be worried about your enterprise status, especially in relation to state funds that may be matching. But I do think that the federal funds, to the extent that, a community, with Tabor restrictions is applying for those federal funds, the federal funds would not count against that Tabor cap. But absolutely worth strategizing as you're thinking of all the different funding sources.
So we're all friends here. So if there are any questions from the folks on the panel that might pose to Nate, fire away. Mr. Cronin?
Thank you, Casey. I'll add to the Tabor comment. During the 2013 flood, the FEMA dollars sort of got routed through the state, and there was a question as to whether or not that would sort of recolor it and trigger some of those Tabor questions. The opinions from most legal folks that I talked to was no, it's not, and even from sort of state of Colorado as well as FEMA, it was all considered federal funds. So I don't know exactly how these funds will get distributed, but if the state does touch them, it seems like that's a safe place for those enterprises. But I agree, it's something everyone needs to be mindful of. But I think the Tabor authors loved other money coming in from other parts of the country, so I think they really get tickled about federal dollars.
Yeah, Sean's exactly right. That federal money flowing through the state, its color of money does not change. And so the technical assistance funds that CWCB is managing are federal funds, but they will not count against a community's Tabor cap. I would say as well, even though that the color of money wouldn't change if it went through the state, much of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding will not flow through the state. It would flow directly from the federal government to local communities. I think the big exception is the state revolving funds that are managed by the state, but the majority of funds will flow directly from the federal government to locals, nonprofits, watershed groups, districts.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you very much. Thank you, members of our group here. It occurred to me as we were getting started here, it might help if I gave a little context of who we are hearing from today. So let me just very quickly run down, of course, Nate Pearson, the State Recovery Officer. And next we're going to get a little practical view from some folks, Jesse, Kruthoft and Kyle Balint are going to give you their own experience of working with a large federal agency and getting grant funding to the local community and what that process is like. So we go from sort of the agency side, and then we're going to flip and we're going to hear from some folks on the ground. And then we are going to take a closer look at that PL 566 we were talking about, infrastructure, flood protection. That's kind of a new program for a lot of us in Colorado. It's not a new program at all, but it is newly recognized. And so we're going to hear both from some federal agency perspective as well as folks who have practical experience on the ground and successful experience on the ground. We didn't invite anybody who wasn't that successful. And then we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, and we're going to look at the EPA non-point source funding, and also have a representative from Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, as well as an organizational professional in the field who has been working with the non-point source program in administering grants and getting stuff done on the ground. And then we're going to move on to Anna Moss, who is with the state of Colorado, and we want to pull the Colorado Water Plan into it, because the statewide water plan is such an opportunity for us to really engage with the local population long term, long-term in that they sit through 3 to 4 hour meetings once a month, but I mean, that's really commitment, and that's people volunteering their time to be part of their community and try to make this connection and translate the goodwill of federal programs into on-the-ground work. So apologize for not setting that up for you all earlier. And then if we have time, I'm going to close with just a little bit of Healthy Rivers Fund talk. That's a very, very localized program that we have. So with that, now it is my pleasure to introduce Jesse Kruthopt with Trout Unlimited of the Upper Gunnison, and Kyle Balint, Trout Unlimited. Kyle's expertise is with the regional farm bill. And that's another sort of opaque topic that we have tried to, present at this conference in the past, and it's been surprisingly hard to pry the lid off of that box. So we're really glad to have these folks here today. And we do have a PowerPoint on this one, and we do have 2 mics. I'm going to let you guys choreograph yourself.
Is there a clicker? Yeah, thanks. Can everyone hear me? Well, really appreciate your time today. As Casey mentioned, I'm Kyle Balint, and I am with Trout Unlimited, and Jesse is with TU as well. I'm our Farm Bill associate, and what that means is I try to connect Farm Bill policy to on-the-ground projects. I do a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and try to get that to folks like Jesse. Jesse, I don't know if you want to do a quick update.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Kruthopt. I'm in the Upper Gunnison. I work for Trout Unlimited as the Upper Gunnison project manager. So all the watersheds that flow into the Aspinall unit, essentially, is my stomping ground. Work directly with landowners on habitat and irrigation infrastructure projects. And I'll let Kyle take it away to kind of give an overview of the couple of federal grants we got and sort of break down the details behind the scenes, and then I'll talk about how we got there and why we needed those funds and how we're using them on the ground. So,
Thanks. And then one other thing, I'm based in Fort Collins. Work a lot in the Colorado River Basin, but have experience with Farm Bill nationally, policy-wise. So I guess who here knows what the Farm Bill is? Do people generally understand what the Farm Bill is? Great, I think most people do, but for those that don't, it's a huge omnibus bill. Roughly every 5 years, it's reauthorized. 2018 was the last Farm Bill. 2023 will be the next Farm Bill. 2018 Farm Bill, there were 12 different titles. These cover everything from conservation and forestry, which we at Trout Unlimited use, to nutrition, commodity insurance, just a huge swath of programs out there. But as I mentioned, conservation title is really the title that TU uses to get our work on the ground. To give you some context of how much this money is, conservation title only takes up 7% of the entire Farm Bill. From 2019 to 2023 fiscal years, $428 billion was appropriated for the Farm Bill. So huge, huge amount of money, but relative to everything else, conservation, only 7%. For TU, there are a number of programs are used, predominantly PL 566, EQIP, RCPP, and SIG. RCPP there is our Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and then SIG are the Conservation Innovation Grants. Structured a little bit differently, and today Jesse and I will talk through those 2 programs and give you a bit of on-the-ground experience with both of those. The RCPP program in 2018 was authorized as a standalone program, $300 million a year. That's a great opportunity to get projects on the ground, build partnerships with other coalitions, and get really watershed scale work done. Functions differently. It's not a grant program. It's a programmatic agreement, which has some complications at times. It can slow things down a bit, I would say, and a bit different structure than maybe some other NRCS grant programs you may be familiar with. As I mentioned, we can get into the nitty-gritty of this if you have questions or really want to know about this, but it's a partnership agreement. You have to fill out supplemental agreements, go through a lot of paperwork to actually get your contracting, and we're going through that right now, and Jesse can maybe touch base on that in a little bit here. It's the $300 million is really divided equally between two different programs within RCPP. You have your critical conservation areas and your state and multi-state programs. State multi-state, you can basically just apply for that if you have an RCPP project. Critical conservation areas are geographically defined regions that the NRCS will then identify priority resource concerns. So in Colorado, you can see we have two different critical conservation areas where you can align your RCPP to get funding. In the Colorado River Basin, the 4 priority resource concerns are inadequate habitat, insufficient water, drought, soil quality degradation, and water quality degradation. So what you can do, align your RCP project with those 4 priority resource concerns, get into that kind of bucket of funding and access that, which may be a bit easier than accessing the state multi-state program where you have just a competitive, it's all competitive, but you don't have to line your projects with any sort of priority resource concerns. I don't have any experience with RCPP on the eastern side of Colorado, that critical conservation area, but we do with the Colorado River Basin. Jesse, I'll turn it over to Jesse and kind of he can talk a little bit about our on-the-ground RCPP work going on right now with TU.
Great, thanks, Kyle. The Gunnison Basin RCPP, that's separate. There's one several years ago. This is a separate one. We dubbed it the Gunnison River Drought Resiliency and Restoration Project, and it all dovetailed out of really on-the-ground work that Trout Unlimited, the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District, and other partners, NRCS included, there in the Upper Gunnison Basin. The stream management planning effort, or the integrated watershed management planning effort, reaching out to landowners, identifying projects, and we're just like overwhelmed with how many projects were being developed. Diversion structures, head gates, control structures down ditch, habitat improvements, and it was just overwhelming. We're like, wow, a frequent visitor to the Water Plan Grant Program and WSRF funds, and we just started thinking like we need some other sources of funding to really carry this forward at a watershed scale. So we pinpointed a couple of watersheds, myself in the Upper Gunnison, and then a colleague, I don't know if anyone remembered, Kerry Dennison, he's no longer with TU. There's another TUer down in the Lower Gunnison named Luke Larita, and he's overseeing the Escalante watershed. That's the other focus area for this RCPP we secured, and it's an alternative funding arrangement RCPP, an AFA, which is different than the classic RCPP in that TU, being that it's contract with the NRCS, TU. Really, our interaction with the local office at the NRCS level is just for NEPA and cultural resources review. The rest of it is subcontracted out to private engineers for design and contractors to do the work. So it's a little, that was the reason we went that route and decided to go with an AFA is because, one, even at the local level, we have a great relationship with the local NRCS office, and their challenges are staffing. They don't have engineering, backup, so there's a several-year backlog on getting projects done. So we're like, well, we've used TSBs and tried to weave through that in the EQIP effort, but to some success. But so we decided, like, if we could hire an outside private engineer to get these designs through the door and get dollars on the ground, it's going to be more effective. So that we went with the AFA route. I can answer questions on that if we need to. So we broke down the funding to around $823,000 is the RCP pool. That's split in FA funds, which is financial assistance for, if you visualize, that's actually like work on the ground, construction, materials, that type of thing. And then TA funds, which is the technical assistance, design, planning, etc. I talked about the two different geographies, and also that we are in close coordination with the local NRCS office and the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District, because there's just the need for the project. So we wanted to team up to get some dollars on the ground. Next slide. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
So I'm not familiar with the AFA, and
So there's two different announcements. There's a RCPP Classic and then a RCPP AFA, and they came out at different times. After discussion that, at the state level with the NRCS, what the pros and cons were, we decided to go with the AFA because our biggest hurdle was getting engineers and getting, designs through the process. I don't know how many more steps were really required as compared to the Classic, because I've never gone that route, but, maybe May could touch on that, or is it? Okay. Yep. Right. Similar in that we're working through, we had a program agreement, the programmatic program agreement, which is the kind of overarching agreement with the NRCS, and now we're working on a supplemental agreement. So it's kind of for the next, it's 2 years, we're penciling out exactly the dollars we're going to spend and who's going to be the contractors, et cetera. The contractors don't have to be TSPs. In our case, but that's worked into the language of the agreement. There's, in some cases, if you had that in there, they would have to be TSPs. So we thought it would be a little more straightforward if they weren't TSPs, because really what we're looking for is just engineered stamped designs, not necessarily the conservation planning, et cetera. Does that answer your question? Okay. Got it. That makes sense. Does that help, Greg? Right, the classic route or classic RCPP would be mostly managed through the local NRCS office with, the standard kind of equip steps. Whereas this is, Trout Unlimited essentially has the funds, the agreement, and we're divvying that out to contractors. And agreements are, the agreements are between the landowner and Trout Unlimited. And granted, they still have to be equip eligible, FSA, registered with the FSA, and et cetera. So that's why we went that route. We thought it would be a little more streamlined. I guess next slide. Again, we already touched on the priority resource concerns for the area, and they all, really matched up with some of the work we were doing on the ground and through the watershed management planning effort and our coordination with local landowners. And our goal is to, address irrigation infrastructure, restore wetlands, riparian areas, and improve water management. We came up with a couple kind of innovative tools we thought would, just make the RCPP a little more attractive, and one of them being this idea that we're using like the irrigation scheduling, for example, and a pay for performance, using some remote sensing to monitor water deliveries and also stream flows and water temperatures, and developing a kind of a structure that would pay irrigators, say if late season, if they manage their irrigation slightly different to bolster stream flows or improve, kind of help mitigate stream temps, or maybe it's if the riparian restoration efforts can help reduce stream temperatures, or we're trying to incentivize those conservation objectives a little bit through monitoring with remote sensing. I can talk a little. We're piecing those the kind of jigsaw puzzle where we're kind of putting those together with individual landowners as we do the projects. So but it's this idea that they get paid for those conservation outcomes. And again, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the remote sensing methodology that we're using. That's this innovative component, and that's in the CIG grant. So we're using that same tool in the CIG and the RCPP. So, but those are the objectives: is use these sensors, a network to monitor the conservation outcomes.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I think as we've kind of talked about, just overall some challenges and efficiencies with the program. Large dedicated funding pool, that's great. Renewal process, talking about some of the challenges, just been timely due to staffing issues, just the amount of forms and just back and forth that we have to do for the program. One other thing, if you do apply for an RCPP, you will use the portal, which it's a Salesforce website, which has increased the burden, I'd say, on NRCS staff and on partners as well. Not exactly an easy portal to use to submit your application and then forms as you're moving along. So, yeah, as Jesse mentioned, we had one other just kind of program we're going to touch base on, and that's a Conservation Innovation Grants program. And this program's worked really well for TU. It's been really efficient. I don't know. Do you have anything to say about it, just overall?
Regarding the RCPP, one of the challenges in the contracting process that I've struggled with is being a little too prescriptive on the actual practices. As we're going through, say, with our agreement with the NRCS, we've got 8 landowners, for example, that we're working with over this period, and X number of restoration, linear feet of restoration or restored bank. But it gets to the point where it's a number of wood toe structures or a number of rock structures, which is kind of hard to guess, as you're looking a year or 2 out, which it makes it a little more challenging to budget. And I've had a hard time putting some of those exact numbers into the agreements, just because you're like, geez, well, we're probably going to have to change that, when we actually get on the ground and do the work. It might be 5 structures instead of 2, So that's something that has been a little challenging for me, but we'll see how it works once we get the stuff on the ground.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. So Conservation Innovation Grants Program is a competitive program that's part of the EQIP funding pool. What it is basically to stimulate and adopt innovative new technologies to get conservation outcomes, agricultural outcomes, improve efficiencies. Just basically, I kind of look at it as like an incubator program for NRCS. There's national and state SIG programs. Today, we're just going to talk specifically about national SIG programs. States can allocate up to 5% of their EQIP funding to SIG. I think there's 15 to 30 states that use SIG at the state level, but nationally is what we're talking about today. And there's 2 different national SIG programs. There's a SIG Classic, which is your development and adoption of new approaches and technologies. These are not tested. These are your approaches that do not have kind of benefits known. This is where you try something. You don't know if it's going to work. 1 to 3 year timeline, smaller funding pool. But to counter that, we have the on-farm trials, which is what Jesse has successfully used down in the Gunnison area. And this is for projects that, for whatever reason, they just haven't been scaled up. They're ready to be scaled up. There's a known quantitative benefit. The outcomes are known, but there's just not that incentive yet for producers to use it. I think for this one, they're looking at priorities for projects that implement conservation approaches to a range of agricultural operations and sizes. I think that was a key thing I've seen through a number of the successful SIG on-farm trials projects. And just really quick overview of kind of comparing the 2 on-farm trials versus classic. You're looking at 3 to 5 years versus 1 to 3. Smaller funding pools, a little bit different match. As you can see, the on-farm trials has a $25 million annual funding pool, whereas the SIG Classic has a $15 million annual funding pool. Those are both met each year. There is not enough money for the number of applications. It's very competitive. SIG Classic from fiscal year 2004 to 2021 had a 17.5% average proposal success rate. there are a ton of opportunities to get more innovative approaches if there is funding available. SIG on-farm trials is new since the 2018 Farm Bill. And Jesse will touch base on that, as I said, later, but kind of a similar story, 27% success rate for proposals. Only 15% of funds requested have been actually allocated. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jesse to kind of chat a bit about what he's doing down in the Gunnison area.
Right. We secured a SIG on-farm trials last fall. So the application submitted around June, I think, of 2021. We got the award letter late October, November 2021. We got it under contract on February 2022. So it's pretty quick turnaround. And our approach with that, so about $350,000 is what we're putting on the ground. The over 2022, 2023, and 2024, we're starting with three sites in 2022, increasing that to 5 sites in 2023, and then 3 more sites in 2024 to total 8 participants over the period. The objective of the CIG on-farm trials is this automated irrigation scheduling for flood irrigated meadows. And it's been kind of a pet project of mine for years, and I've actually applied for the SIG a couple times since like 2018, I think. What we're using, being in the Upper Gunnison, we're high elevation, irrigated, flood irrigated meadows. There hasn't been a lot of traction or interest in, your really efficient application measures like pivots or sprinkler or gated pipe. One, because it just doesn't really pay. The low cost, yield, short growing season, and the benefits of some of the benefits of flood irrigation for habitat purpose, and recharging the aquifer, wildlife benefits, waterfowl, et cetera, et cetera. So like, how can we make these improvements more efficient? And scheduling was something that producers are like, yeah, we can really use improving the scheduling of irrigation timing, that'll reduce our labor and improve our water efficiency. So we went that route with this innovative little gadget that it's a timer type of structure that will help irrigators deliver the water to the meadows exactly when they need it, based on time or an environmental variable like soil moisture or return flows. So next slide. I think are we running out of time on this? Okay. If okay, and coupled with the irrigation scheduling, this LoRaWAN, it's a radio frequency that we've started using for remote sensing. So just like you can have a sensor in the stream, like a pressure transducer or a water temperature sensor in the stream, you can have that transmit data out via cell or satellite, et cetera. A real inexpensive way that we've started TU's been able to use these same sensors, water level sensor, temperature sensor, soil moisture sensor, and it has a radio that's sending a frequency. It's a different frequency to the LoRaWAN network. So you have one base station, and you can have hundreds of sensors that talk to that one base station up on like a hill or even on a barn or something like that. So that was another innovative component, and that's the tool we're using in the RCPP as well as the CRG, is to use these remote sensing networks that are farmer owned or rancher owned to help with irrigation scheduling, help monitor stream flows, stream temperatures. It may be monitoring tailwater off the field, for example. That's when they want to change their irrigation set, is when the lower gradient structure gets water and delivers it, and then they know, okay, it's time to switch the set. So those are the tools that we're using for the CIG, but that's the innovation component. But there also has to be a monitoring component where you're actually monetizing the benefits and quantifying the benefits. So CSU is helping with that. Yields, labor reductions, soil health components. Like, how do we package all this together and share it with other producers to encourage an adoption of the innovative tools? So does that make sense to everybody? That's the objective of the on-farm trials, is to put the tools in the field, monitor what the benefits are in a quantitative way, and be able to share that with other producers and allow them to make the decision if they want to use it. yeah, absolutely. I think it would fit into the, say if you have that network where I call it like the LoRaWAN network, and that can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be LoRaWAN, it can be cellular or whatever, but it's just a network of sensors you have out there that you pull up on your dashboard and say, okay, boom, this guy's in priority, you know what he's getting or supposed to be getting, and then that can be controlled remotely on, you know, an actuator that opens and closes the head gate, for example. These types of structures, the automated timer structure, it's better suited to me than to be out in the actual fields than off of the, you know, main channel. The Conejos Conservancy District down in the San Luis Valley, I came up and did a site tour of using these timer type of structures, and is it Nathan, I believe? He's very interested in how he can make it fit into his system, and they're pretty strictly regulated, you know, as far as priority and et cetera. So I think it can, but it just looking at the system and plugging in, you know, with sensors you need, maybe it's an actuator that raises and lowers a gate rather than just a timer structure that just triggers it at a certain time. And I'll digress just slightly. The reason we went with that timer structure is because it's really low cost. You're talking like $100 that somebody could put on their existing your check structure, not a head gate, out in the field. You know, $100, they can retrofit an existing check structure, and that gives them the ability to schedule their irrigation rather than putting, you know, $5,000 into each structure, because they may have 20 or 30 of them on one ditch. So, does that help? And that LoRaWAN, again, it's technology that's out there via cell, satellite, et cetera. The LoRaWAN is just, it's sort of a newer technology, and maybe there's probably a contractor out there that can kind of lay it out and say, hey, this is what the cost via LoRa, this is the cost via cell, that type of thing.
I don't want to cut you short, but
I think we're good.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to grab one of those mics and just see, because I mean, I'd love to give a little opportunity for folks in the room to ask some other questions, and I'm going to go first. So I'm curious to know, how many Conservation District people are there in the room? Raise those hands high. Okay. Okay, I mean, that is something that we have struggled with again, and at this conference, we've made some headroads getting the Conservation District folks to come, because of course the NRCS, and this is naive on my part, but the NRCS programs, as I understand it, are typically tied to private landowner relationships and Conservation District relationships, and it is unusual that Trout Unlimited, other than maybe providing staff people to an NRCS office, would be in the role that you're in. So is there anything that we can do as folks who live in Colorado and should know about conservation districts, whether we own a farm or ranch or, you know, ag property or not? A lot of the municipalities and smaller towns and whatnot, I think, would really benefit from having some supportive relationship with their conservation districts. Am I being real naive about that, or?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm following you. For example, in Gunnison, the Upper Gunnison Water, you know, River Water Conservancy District was a great partner with TU, great partner with the city of Gunnison, for example, that has projects that we're working through a similar process of identifying what the needs are, what the funding gap is, and then working hand in hand to try to track down the funds. Maybe it's PL 566 or Water Smart funds. Is that what you're asking? Is like how?
No,
how
I think I wasn't clear. I was speaking to conservation districts.
Okay. Okay.
not water conservancy districts,
Okay,
but
like a soil
conservation.
conservation
Yes,
district, yeah.
soil,
Yep,
well, there's
right.
soil and water conservation districts,
Yep,
but
okay.
yeah, they're the, kind of the
Yep.
guys that have pancake breakfasts and stuff like that to try to stay afloat.
Right. Like in our area, yeah, the Gunnison Soil Conservation District, there's overlap with, you know, NRCS and the Soil Conservation District. The board meets once a month. They could certainly use some capacity funds. I feel like, you know, I've done several projects with them over the years, and they kind of have a revolving door of an executive director, you know, that isn't full-time, it's part-time, and then they become overwhelmed just keeping the, you know, kind of the budget up and running. But yeah, certainly that would be a huge role, I feel like, with the Soil Conservation District if in these different watersheds, if they could get more engaged, that would be awesome. In some cases, they are already, you know,
Yeah,
Charbonneau is
absolutely.
a big one, they're really active.
All right, well, I don't mean to hog the mic on this, but I really wanted to know that. Any other questions for Kyle and Jesse, and we'll have more opportunities to chat? Okay. All right, you guys have great outdoor voices, so you're good too, Sean.
We haven't yet. We're still working through the contracting phase on the RCPP side of things, but we're looking at turbidity and other, you know, really that's the biggest. Temperature, turbidity are the ones that we feel like we could capture with our network of sensors. If there's other ones suggested, we certainly try to plug them in. We're looking at trout populations too, you know, CPW sampling in different reaches and how that changes over time, pre and post project. If you could, nutrients will be great. Nutrients, yep, right. That's good point. Yep, we have that as in the CIG proposal. That's one of the outcomes that we're looking at by changing the irrigation schedule, and if we can capture some of the nutrient loading in the phosphorus. And, okay. Thank you.
Sean.
Kyle could touch on that a bit. That's like I said, I tried to go after, you know, the CIG in 2018, 2019 unsuccessfully, just managing project work and going after these funds. And I mean, like it's a, you know, dang near a full-time job. So TU hired a full-time Farm Bill associate that's focused on, you know, one, the Farm Bill stuff, but also Water Smart federal funding. And Kyle's in that role, and it's kind of a full-time role.
Yeah, so this is what I do every day. I think FTE wise, we had it in the RCPP. a lot. It's a good amount. And to kind of talk about your NRCS staffing and capacity, they certainly recognize that there are capacity issues. I was in a stakeholder meeting last week with NRCS National, and I think they had mentioned that they were looking to hire another 3,000 people over the next couple of years. So there's certainly an acknowledgement of that, and the staff that we've worked with have been great. They, there's just capacity issues, and that's just the way it is. So.
Thank you very much, Kyle and Jesse, both. And we will have more time for back and forth, and we're here for at least another day and a half. So get to know each other and ask some questions, but this is great. Thank you. Madam, you're now official. So now we're going to dive deeper. We're going to still looking at the NRCS as a big program, but we're going to look at the PL 566, which stands for something. I did know this at one time, the 566 related to something, so B is going to help us with that. Blankshia Cha is with us with the U.S. Natural Resources Conservation Service. She's a watershed program specialist, and Mr. Scott Griebling is here. He's a water resources engineer with the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District. And I apologize if I misspoke earlier because I was really trying to get at that conservation district question. Oh, okay, okay, good. Well, we got some microphones for you all, and clicker, and you have a program.
Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go.
You know, it probably works better if you can to stand away from the speakers a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So I'll start it off. I'm Blankshia Cha. I go by B. I'm the watershed program specialist, and I deal specifically with the PL 566 program at NRCS. I manage the program for the state. So usually if you guys have any questions about PL 566, you'll be talking about me. But you know, what is PL 566? So technically there are 4 watershed programs under the PL 566 program. The one we often refer to is actually the Watershed Flood Prevention Operations Program, or Watershed Ops. It's got many different names. The other 3 programs are the Watershed Dam Rehabilitation Program, which deals specifically with dams that NRCS has built in the past. The Emergency Watershed Protection Program, which deals with assistance to protect life and property after a natural disaster. And then the Watershed Surveys and Planning Program, which hasn't really been in use in recent years. But a little bit of background on the PL 566 program. So it is one of NRCS's oldest programs. It was authorized in 1954 by the Watershed Protection and Prevention Act, also known as the PL 83566 program. What that means is that was public law. It was authorized by the 83rd Congress, and it was the 566th law they passed. So the more you know. So a little bit about the program. Where is this money coming from? So in 2018, the Farm Bill authorized a minimum of $50 million that has to be allocated to NRCS watershed programs every year for the PL 566 program. That's just the minimum they have to give us. We've received more before. So in 2018 and 2019, we received $150 million each year. In 2020, we received $175 million nationally. And then, you know, I couldn't find how much we received in 2021 or this year, but I would assume it would be along that range. So you can expect at least $100 million nationwide each year. $50 million was allocated in the infrastructure bill. Out of that, about 90% of it has been obligated already, and some of it was in Colorado. That being said, just because that $50 million has already been obligated, the way I look at that is that $50 million in projects has been wiped out of the way, which means we can compete. Oh, yes, go ahead. Oh, 500, I'm sorry. I only had 1 cup of coffee this morning, so. But yes, 500 million out of that, 90% of it has already been obligated. That's wiped out 500 million, sorry, in projects nationwide that now we can use either funds that weren't expended from previous years or this year's funds or, upcoming funds from the Farm Bill to, pursue. Colorado, our state conservationist has designated that we're targeting to be the top 5 in the country for the program. So right now we're actively looking for sponsors. So what is a sponsor? Well, general requirements for the project is that we have to have at least one sponsor that can, at least one of them has to be some sort of unit of government, whether that be, city, county, state, tribal, water or soil conservancy districts. The project has to have at least one of the 8 authorized uses in it. There has to be at least a 20% agriculture or rural community benefit. Right now, a rural community is defined as a population less than 50,000, and it has to have a watershed plan, either EA or EIS. We good to move on to the next slide? Get your pictures? Some other constraints are we can't have any structure that is greater than 12,500 acre feet of flood storage or total capacity of 25,000 acre feet. A project has to have congressional approval if we go over 25 million for construction, and that's on the federal portion of the cost share. Or if we have a single structure that has a total capacity of greater than 2,500 acre feet. Last, there's typically no other USDA program available for these projects. So these are the requirements that a sponsor must have in order to be a sponsor on a project. They have to have the power of eminent domain. They have to have the ability to acquire permits and taxes. Well, permits and licenses. They have to have the authority to levy taxes and the ability to enter into agreements with the federal government. Some of the requirements that the sponsor would be responsible for is their, these projects they require public input, so they're required to encourage and obtain public participation, provide the local cost share portion. They have to obtain any permits and land rights and water rights. They have to perform the construction contracting, especially because if we did a federal construction contract, it'd be exponentially more expensive than if we did a local one. So we prefer to have them locally contracted, and they're required to provide operation and maintenance for the project afterwards. So these are the 8 authorizations through the watershed program. So at least one of them has to be met for a project. Ag water management, typically we do, irrigation infrastructure improvement. We can, upgrade irrigation reservoirs through that. Watershed protection, we can do land treatments through that authorization. Flood prevention, we can, build structures for flood prevention, municipal and industrial water supply. We can provide storage needed for municipal and industrial use. However, we can't provide any wells or any distribution for M&I use. We can do public recreation, fish and wildlife, water quality management is, providing the storage again for water to, manage temperature downstream or, things like that. And then last is the water structure rehabilitation, and that once again is for NRCS built dams or structures. So this is everybody's favorite part, the cost share portion. So planning and engineering, the really nice thing about PL 566 is NRCS is on the hook for planning and engineering. So there's no cost, as you guys can see, we cover 100% for the technical aspect of it. Construction varies, so ag water management, we can cost share up to 75% of construction. Watershed protection varies from 50 to 75%, and that's because it can't exceed our normal Farm Bill rates for those practices. Flood prevention, the best deal we have, 100%. Construction costs, and then fish, wildlife, and municipal industrial water, we cost share 50%. Also, to be noted is that the sponsor would be required to cover the land rights, permits, or O&M costs through this program. So how long does this typically take? These are long-term projects. So it all starts off when a sponsor requests assistance, and that would be written, request of assistance through the PL 566 program. You guys have, questions on what needs to be in there, ask us. We've got a lovely template. So after we receive the request, we move on to a preliminary investigation and feasibility report, or a PIFR for short, because we love acronyms. They typically take 3 to 6 months, and they, look at the general feasibility, whether that be economic, social, are there any intangibles or, red flags that would stop a project? We look at those in the feasibility report. Typically, those are contracted out. Right now, they're contracted out to Jones and DeMillion out of Utah. They're the Western contractor that we have for the PIFers. After we receive the PIFer, if it comes back that the project is feasible, we go on to planning. We request funds for each stage. So at the PIFer stage, we request funds for the PIFer, and then we request funds when we get to the planning stage for the plan. Typically, we'll have to do a Plan EA or a Plan EIS, depending on which triggers are in your project that would require Plan EIS. We expect to take about 2 years for a Plan EA, add about another 6 months to a year for an EIS. It could possibly take longer depending on what's in your project, but that's how long we would expect to get them through. Lastly, once the watershed plan is complete, it gets authorized by the chief of NRCS in DC. Once it gets authorized by him, we move on to design and construction. If we have to do an EIS, we would have to get congressional approval, and depending on, the requirements for the project, it would either, have to go to a Senate committee or a House committee or both to get congressional approval. Finally, we get to design and construction, and we usually expect 3 to 5 years for design and construction. So it's at least, a 5 to 7 year process from project initiation to project completion. So how to get it started? You guys have the ideas. Please talk to NRCS. We'll look at, the various requirements that we might need for each project. And then, we'll start the PIFR and get this rolling. Sean? Or no, Scott, sorry.
Can I interrupt just for a moment? Lakshya, you said if you have any questions, talk to NRCS.
Talk to me.
All right, so you guys all have your personal cell phone, and you have the guidebook that has been set up for this conference. So we will have contact information available through this tool. So I just, if you didn't bring 500 cards or something like that, just know that this is an opportunity to be in touch with you.
Thank you.
If I just talk normally, can you guys all hear me? So I get to share our sponsor experience. So the St. Brendan Left-Hand Water Conservancy District is just entering the PIFR part of that process. So going back to this slide, we are in that 3 to 6 month period of the preliminary investigation and feasibility report. So I'll tell you how we got there, and you guys can ask whatever questions you might have. One thing that separate funding is then allocated for the watershed plan and EA/EIS phase, and then what money is allocated for actual design and construction. So we got that first bit of funding for the PIFR allocated, and we said, okay, show us your projects, and we got busy talking to all of our stakeholders, again, city, county, various ditch companies, and nonprofits to compile a large list of projects that would go into that PIFR report. And we came up with 37 projects. Some of those projects are kind of grouped projects. The total cost of those projects is $237.5 million. So lots of projects and lots of money. This certainly puts us into that EIS range. So you could, depending on the funding request and depending on the size of various storage projects, as B mentioned, it triggers either an EA or an EIS. We are going to be likely going through the EIS process. That helps inform, it helps gather public comment through the EIS process so that for the congressional approval piece of the funding, that process helps input or give Congress what it needs to make its decision for approval. Our thought was, if we're going to do this, might as well go big. In our initial conversations with the NRCS, we kind of jokingly said, hey, what if we could probably come up with $2 million worth of projects? And they politely didn't turn us down and still haven't turned us down. So we are, we're really curious to see which of our projects fully align and come out of the PIFR project, the PIFR process with the stamp of approval to move on to the plan EA side of things. We're confident that a lot of them align really well, but as B said, there's, the purpose of that preliminary investigation is to look through, make sure there aren't any red flags, make sure they align with the program, and also make sure that they're feasible. The level of design that went into those 37 projects ranges. So some of them we have kind of feasibility study, conceptual design done. Some of them are not quite there yet. Some of them are still kind of in the infancy, more very much on the conceptual side of things, where they're identified as needs in our planning documents, but they're not necessarily fully fleshed out. And so, again, curious to see what level of project is, what level of design is needed to really successfully get through the PIFR process before it enters into the plan and the EA process. It's my understanding that that watershed plan process, and to successfully evaluate the environmental assessment or the environmental impact of a project, you need a certain level of design to be completed, and so NRCS helps fund that level of design. So kind of 30-ish% design through that process. So the big takeaway for us was projects don't need to be fully fleshed out. You don't have to have 100% design on a project. It can be kind of just an idea that you have enough support around to actually carry it through towards the next step of design and into the EA design, that kind of 30% design process. We've got 11 different project partners throughout our basin. We are the sponsor organization, but we are working with a bunch of entities in our watershed to help make these projects a reality. Some breakdown of the type of projects that we have and some general cost numbers. Again, we'll see kind of where this all falls out after the PIFR process, but we're looking at a lot of off-channel storage projects, and we are calling those, so our district has uniquely trademarked the creek improvement facility term, and Jenny McCarty is going to be presenting on those at the poster session tomorrow. So creek improvement facilities are, we're really excited about a unique approach to off-channel storage that has multi-purpose, multi-benefit, looking at ways to creatively bring additional storage capacity that has an environmental or recreation benefit, as well as just helping increase the storage available in our basin, helps to bring both some municipal infrastructure, but a lot of the municipal infrastructure in our basin, there's a agricultural component to it. So really curious again to see how those projects pan out for which funding category they fit into. River restoration projects and fish passage projects kind of, again, link up with canal improvements with headgate and diversion structure, reconstruction or reconfiguration. Also river restoration, looking at flood resiliency and flood protection through sedimentation. So creating areas within the stream corridor that could act as sedimentation, places for sedimentation depositional areas, and seeing the type of flood improvements or the flood protection that that type of approach might provide. Some recreation projects, and we have some forest management, kind of on the forest management, watershed management side of things as well. And then some planning and monitoring projects, which you might say are crazy because they don't fully align with other things, but we thought we'd throw them in there and just see what we find out. So again, we have a lot to learn in this process, and come back to us in 6 months, and we will likely have some more specific answers on this. But it has been great to work with NRCSB. Has been fantastic to work with your whole team. We're really excited about this opportunity. We're really excited about leveraging our local funding and the funding that our voters approved for us, and taking really some 5x times, turning that money around multiple times, and accomplishing some really cool projects for our base. So a few considerations, as Dee mentioned, this is a long process. So if you have a project that is ready to go, this might not be the best project for you. I really love, again, that it is a watershed scale program, so that you can address multiple issues within a watershed. That you can look at, we've got projects high in the watershed, we've got projects low in the watershed, and everywhere in between. We've got ag-focused projects, municipal-focused projects, environmental-focused projects. So really, we were able to take this very broad program and bring about a lot of different individual projects into it. A lot of them work well nicely together. So really cool to see how all of that works. This permitting piece is something I'm sure many of you are aware of and thoughtful of. Because it is federal dollars, it does trigger the federal permitting process. And the NRCS is the lead agency through that process. And because of that, there are some potential efficiencies that you can help with, that the NRCS can move the ball forward on, that where other projects might get a little high center. So we're hopeful about that. And then the match funding is certainly something to come up with. The 75% construction portion that the NRCS covers is fantastic, and on large projects, the individual match can still be higher. So that's where I think some of what Nate was talking about and some of the state funds can help meet that as well. That's all we have. I hope you don't mind to hear you out there too.
I have a couple of questions, so I'll try to roll them together. So is there a place, can you just, first of all, are there many projects like this happening?
Channel to bypass. Oops, thank you. I have a quiet voice. Thank you. We are creating a channel, to bypass Windy Gap Reservoir and connect the Colorado River again for fish passage. They've worked with us. Also, the National Watershed Coalition. They're a group of, groups all over the nation that have worked on PL 566. So, that might be another useful group. Colorado, we're still kind of getting back into this program. So it was very active in the 50s and 60s, and around the 90s, early 2000, funding dried up. And so, many of the teams that were in place then have now been dissolved, except for, I think, Oklahoma and Texas. So we're, working on rebuilding our team and, getting more projects to fund that. So that's kind of.
Is there a place where we can see like a listing of those projects? Is it on the NRCS website?
Yes and no. So you can go, sorry. So you can go to the landscape projects and the PL 566 website. They do have an interactive map for the infrastructure bill funding. So projects that were, funded through that, they have those listed. Some of our previous projects, I'm not quite sure if they're listed or not on there. So that's kind of.
So Beth, we'll make a point of getting B's information on into Guidebook and whatever other resources
Yeah.
and links and things like that that we can make available. I do want to point out that Greg Peterson is raising his hand because he is another terrific resource, especially with respect to agricultural type projects. And Greg brought this whole PL 566 kind of reincarnated it in a way. And so he's learned a lot. And I'm going to ask Greg to take just a few minutes. We're going to break here real soon. But I don't want to interrupt this train of thought, if it's okay. So, Greg, if I could just impose on you and ask you to share, what your experience has been.
Yeah, well, B and I, we've been corresponding. We've had a torrid relationship through emails and Zoom calls, and now we finally get to meet in person. So we've been working on PL 566 for about almost a year now and learning about it. And about a year ago, we were introduced to this group called Farmers Conservation Alliance out of Oregon. And they've pulled about almost $200 million for their irrigation districts. And they have irrigation districts that are done, fully modernized. And just the idea of that is wild to think about. It's like, do you have projects? Oh, we have operations and maintenance, and that's it. And so right now, we're working with, we have 5 of these projects we're working with on pre-development, and one is in Huerfano County is just starting the PIFR process, and we probably have another 3 that we'll be picking up in the next 6 months. And all ag-oriented projects, and we're hoping that in conjunction with Water Congress in January, we'd like to do an event with sponsors of all these different projects, just to really talk about what do we like about the process, what's working, but also match funding, because that's going to be a big component of where is that going to come from. And I think just all of us trying to coordinate together is working out pretty well, because we're learning just, I think Gretchen down in Mancos, she's a little bit further along than you guys, and we're learning quite a bit from her and just what her trials and tribulations are. And so, Beth, I'll be more than happy to talk with you. And what we're trying to do right now is with these projects, we're not a sponsor, but working in areas where there's interest and there's sponsors, and then kind of building them up and then giving them support along the way, and just describing what this process is like and just what are the opportunities. I mean, it's.
And you're working with, does Gretchen rank with the Mancos Conservation District?
She's flying alone, and she's doing great at the moment. But but we're working projects in Rio Blanco County, Delta County, Mesa County, Montezuma County, possibly Routt County, and then a few more in, like one in we're looking on Ohio Creek in the Gunnison, possibly one Boulder Valley. They're jealous of Sean's project. They're right next door to him. Mostly, and the sponsors for all of them will either be a conservation district or a conservancy district. Yeah. That's so confusing. Yeah, it is. We need different names.
Thank you so much, Greg, for stepping up. Thank you, Bea. Thank you, Scott. Let's take a short 10-ish minute break, if we can be back here at 10:15, and then we will continue on. We're going to hear from kind of the water quality side of things, non-point source funding, and we'll be hearing about the opportunities in the Colorado Water Plan. So there are beverages in the foyer. Stretch your legs, move around, get comfortable, and we'll see you back at 10:15. Thank you.